The rain poured down hard that night, washing the streets in cold silver. Officer Ramirez was just ending her shift when she heard tiny footsteps, then a voice, trembling through the storm. "Please, ma'am, they're beating my mama." A little girl, no older than 6, stood there in soaked pajamas, her hands clutching a torn teddy bear. Her face was streaked with tears and mud, but her eyes were full of terror. Without a second thought, the officer dropped her coffee, grabbed her radio, and ran. But when she reached the house, what she found inside didn't look like a crime scene. It looked like something much darker, and what she did next would change her life forever. Stay with me until the end, because this story will break your heart and then restore your faith in humanity. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now, let's get started. Officer Maria Ramirez had seen enough darkness in her 8 years on the force to recognize desperation when it spoke. The child's voice cut through the storm like a blade, sharp and urgent, carrying the kind of fear that freezes blood in veins. This wasn't a prank or attention-seeking behavior. This was pure terror wrapped in a 6-year-old's trembling words. The girl's name was Emma, though Officer Ramirez wouldn't learn this until later. What she knew immediately was that this small figure standing in the downpour represented someone's entire world collapsing. The torn teddy bear, a brown creature missing one eye, hung limply from Emma's grip like a witness to horrors no child should endure. Officer Ramirez knelt down, her uniform soaking through as rain continued its relentless assault on the empty street. "Emma," she said gently, trying to keep her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "Can you tell me what's happening to your mama?" Emma's response came in broken fragments between sobs. "The men came back. They said Mama owed them money. She tried to hide me in the closet, but I could hear her screaming. They're hurting her real bad." The officer's training kicked in immediately. She radioed for backup while simultaneously processing the scene before her. A child, alone in a storm, reporting violence against her mother. Protocol demanded immediate response. But something deeper than protocol drove Officer Ramirez forward, something that spoke to the mother in her own heart. "Where is your house, sweetheart?" Officer Ramirez asked, already moving toward her patrol car. Emma pointed down the street with a shaking finger, the blue one with the broken fence. "Please hurry. They said they were going to make Mama pay one way or another." The drive took less than 90 seconds, but it felt like hours. Officer Ramirez could see Emma's face in her rearview mirror, pressed against the window, watching her own home grow larger as they approached. The house Emma indicated stood dark, except for a flickering light in what appeared to be the living room window. Officer Ramirez parked strategically, positioning her vehicle to provide cover while maintaining clear sight lines to the residence. The backup she'd requested was still minutes away, but every instinct screamed that minutes might be too long. Emma's mother might not have minutes. "Stay in the car, Emma. Lock the doors and don't come out no matter what happens. Do you understand me?" Emma nodded, clutching her teddy bear tighter. Her small voice whispered, "Please save my mama. She's all I got." Those words hit Officer Ramirez like physical blows. She thought of her own daughter, safe at home with her grandmother, probably already asleep in warm pajamas with a full belly and tomorrow's school clothes laid out carefully. The contrast between that security and Emma's current reality felt like stepping between two different universes. Officer Ramirez approached the house with measured steps, her hand resting on her service weapon, while her other hand held her radio close. The broken fence Emma had mentioned told its own story. Splintered wood and rusted wire suggested this wasn't the first time violence had visited this address. Through the living room window, she could see shadows moving inside. Voices carried through the thin walls, though the words remained unclear through the storm's noise. What was clear was the tone. Angry, demanding, threatening, and underneath it all, the sound that made Officer Ramirez's jaw clench with determination. A woman's voice, pleading, The front door stood slightly ajar, hanging crooked on damaged hinges. Officer Ramirez positioned herself beside the entrance, listening carefully to assess the situation inside. 3 distinct male voices, all aggressive. 1 female voice, desperate and scared. The mathematics of the situation weren't encouraging. Officer Ramirez made a decision that would later be scrutinized by her superiors, analyzed by investigators, and ultimately vindicated by results. She couldn't wait for backup. Every second that passed increased the danger to Emma's mother. Sometimes being a police officer meant making choices that textbooks couldn't prepare you for. She keyed her radio one more time. "Dispatch, this is Unit 247, I'm going in. Multiple suspects, 1 victim, child witness secure in my vehicle. Send additional units and paramedics to my location immediately." The response crackled back through static. "Unit 247, backup is en route. Advise waiting for support before entry." Officer Ramirez looked back at her patrol car, where Emma's silhouette was visible through the rear window. The child's posture spoke of desperate hope, placed entirely in the hands of a stranger. Sometimes the right choice and the safe choice weren't the same thing. Negative, dispatch. "I'm going in now." Officer Ramirez stepped through the doorway into a scene that would haunt her dreams for years to come. The living room had been destroyed. Furniture overturned, pictures torn from walls, belongings scattered like debris after an explosion. In the center of this chaos, 3 men surrounded a woman who was clearly Emma's mother. The family resemblance was unmistakable despite the bruises already forming on the woman's face. "Police! Everyone on the ground now!" The 3 men turned toward Officer Ramirez with expressions ranging from surprise to anger to calculation. The largest of the 3, a man with arms covered in tattoos and hands that looked like they'd inflicted considerable damage, stepped forward with a sneer. "This ain't your business, lady cop. This is between us and Sarah here. She owes us money, and we're just collecting what's ours." Sarah, Emma's mother, looked up from the floor with eyes that held both relief and terror. "Help me," she whispered through split lips. "Please don't let them hurt my baby." Officer Ramirez kept her weapon trained on the group, while her mind rapidly processed options. 3 against 1 wasn't ideal odds, especially in close quarters with a civilian in the crossfire. But retreat wasn't an option. Not with Emma waiting in the car. Not with Sarah bleeding on her own living room floor. I said, "Everyone on the ground. Hands behind your heads. Now." The tattooed man laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "You really think you're gonna arrest all 3 of us? You're either brave or stupid, and I'm betting on stupid." What happened next would become the defining moment of Officer Ramirez's career, though she wouldn't understand that until much later. In that instant, facing 3 violent men who clearly had no intention of surrendering peacefully, she made a choice that prioritized protection over protocol, humanity over procedure. The first man reached for what appeared to be a weapon tucked into his waistband. Officer Ramirez didn't hesitate. The gunshot echoed through the house like thunder, but Officer Ramirez hadn't fired. The sound came from behind her. Backup had arrived just as the situation reached its breaking point. Detective Mills burst through the doorway, weapon drawn, taking in the scene with trained eyes. "Drop your weapons now. This is your final warning." The 3 men found themselves surrounded, their bravado evaporating as quickly as it had appeared. The tattooed leader's hand froze halfway to his concealed weapon. His companions raised their hands slowly, recognizing that their window of opportunity had slammed shut. Officer Ramirez maintained her position, never taking her eyes off the suspects, while additional officers flooded into the small living room. The careful choreography of law enforcement in action played out around Sarah, who remained curled on the floor, protecting herself from further violence. Within minutes, all 3 men were in handcuffs, their threats reduced to muttered curses as they were led away. But Officer Ramirez's focus had already shifted entirely to the 2 victims who needed her attention most urgently. Sarah struggled to sit up, wincing with each movement. Her left arm hung at an unnatural angle, clearly broken. Blood trickled from cuts on her face and hands where she'd tried to defend herself. But her first words weren't about her injuries. "Emma. Where's Emma? Is my baby safe?" "She's in my patrol car," Officer Ramirez assured her, kneeling beside the injured woman. "She's the one who led me to you. That little girl saved your life tonight, Sarah." Tears mixed with blood on Sarah's cheeks as the reality hit her. Her 6-year-old daughter had somehow escaped the house, found help, and brought that help back in time. The courage it must have taken for such a small child to venture out into a storm, approach a stranger, and ask for help overwhelmed her. The paramedics arrived as Officer Ramirez was helping Sarah move to the couch. Their professional assessment revealed the extent of the damage. Broken ribs, a fractured arm, severe bruising, and a concussion that explained why Sarah's words came slowly and with obvious effort. "Ma'am, we need to get you to the hospital immediately," the lead paramedic explained while checking Sarah's pupils with a small flashlight. "You've sustained significant injuries that require immediate medical attention. I can't leave Emma." Sarah's voice carried the desperation of a mother whose protective instincts overrode her physical pain. "She needs me. She's just a baby." Officer Ramirez placed a gentle hand on Sarah's uninjured shoulder. "Emma's coming with us. I promise you won't be separated. She's been through enough tonight." The ride to the hospital became a study in contrasts. Sarah, strapped to a gurney in the back of the ambulance, fought to stay conscious while asking repeatedly about her daughter. Emma, small and quiet in the passenger seat of Officer Ramirez's patrol car following behind, stared straight ahead with the 1,000-yard stare of someone who'd seen too much for her age. Officer Ramirez found herself making promises she wasn't sure she could keep. "Everything's going to be okay now, Emma. Your mama's hurt, but the doctors are going to fix her up good as new." But Emma's response revealed a wisdom beyond her years. "Those men said they'd come back. What happens when Mama gets better and we go home?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire that refused to die. Officer Ramirez realized that arresting the 3 attackers was only the beginning of this story, not the end. Emma and Sarah needed protection that extended far beyond one night's rescue. At the hospital, the emergency room staff moved with practiced efficiency. Sarah was rushed into treatment while Emma was examined for injuries. Physically, the child was unharmed. Emotionally, the damage would take time to fully understand. Officer Ramirez stayed with Emma during her examination, holding her hand while nurses checked her over. The little girl hadn't spoken much since asking about the men returning, but her grip on Officer Ramirez's hand never loosened. Dr. Patterson, the emergency room physician treating Sarah, approached with an update. The mother's injuries were serious, but not life-threatening. Broken bones would heal, cuts would fade, but the psychological trauma would require ongoing support. "She's asking for her daughter," Dr. Patterson reported. "We've stabilized her condition, but she won't rest until she sees that Emma's safe." The reunion between mother and daughter took place in a sterile hospital room that couldn't contain the emotion of their embrace. Sarah, despite her pain medication and physical limitations, pulled Emma close with her good arm and held her as if she might disappear. "I'm so sorry, baby," Sarah whispered into Emma's hair. "Mama should have protected you better. You shouldn't have had to run out into the storm like that." Emma's response surprised everyone in the room. "You taught me to be brave, Mama. You taught me to find help when bad things happen. I did what you taught me." Officer Ramirez watched this exchange while processing her own emotions. In 8 years of police work, she'd responded to countless domestic violence calls, but something about Emma and Sarah's situation had gotten under her skin in a way that felt both professional and deeply personal. The immediate crisis was over, but Officer Ramirez understood that her involvement in their lives was just beginning. The 3 attackers would face charges, but the system that had failed to protect Sarah before might fail again. Emma had shown incredible courage in seeking help, but a 6-year-old shouldn't have to be her mother's protector. As the night wore on, Officer Ramirez found herself making phone calls that went beyond her official duties. She contacted social services, victim advocacy groups, and legal aid organizations. Emma and Sarah would need support that extended far beyond law enforcement. The hospital social worker, Mrs. Chen, arrived near dawn to assess the situation. Her experience with domestic violence cases immediately recognized the complexity of Emma and Sarah's circumstances. The men who attacked Sarah tonight were collecting on a debt, Mrs. Chen explained to Officer Ramirez in the hallway outside Sarah's room. But our investigation shows this isn't their first visit. There's a pattern of escalating violence that suggests Sarah and Emma have been living in fear for months. Why didn't she report it earlier? Officer Ramirez asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Fear, shame, lack of resources, threats against her child. The usual reasons women stay trapped in these situations. Sarah works 2 minimum wage jobs just to keep food on the table and a roof over Emma's head. When dangerous people threaten the only stability you have, sometimes staying quiet seems like the safer option. Officer Ramirez thought about Emma's courage in running through the storm to find help. That little girl had done what her mother felt she couldn't do. She'd reached out to strangers and trusted that someone would answer her cry for help. What happens now? Officer Ramirez asked. Where do they go from here? Mrs. Chen's expression grew serious. That depends on whether we can provide them with real safety, not just temporary protection. Sarah's physical injuries will heal in a few weeks, but unless we address the underlying threats, this cycle will continue. The conversation was interrupted by a commotion from Sarah's room. Emma's voice, high and scared, called out for Officer Ramirez. The little girl had woken from a nightmare, reliving the events of the previous evening. Officer Ramirez hurried into the room to find Emma sitting up in the chair beside her mother's bed, tears streaming down her face. The brave little girl who had run through a storm to save her mother was, in that moment, simply a frightened child who needed comfort. I dreamed they came back, Emma whispered. I dreamed they hurt you worse, and I couldn't find help this time. Officer Ramirez sat beside Emma's chair, her voice steady and calm despite the exhaustion weighing on her shoulders. Those men can't hurt you anymore, sweetheart. They're locked up where they can't reach you or your mama. Sarah stirred in her hospital bed, the pain medication making her movements slow, but her maternal instincts sharp as ever. Emma, come here, baby. Let mama hold you. Emma climbed carefully onto the bed, nestling against her mother's good side. The torn teddy bear found its place between them, a silent guardian that had witnessed their darkest hour and somehow survived intact. Officer Ramirez watched this tender moment, while her mind raced through everything that still needed to happen. The arrests were just the beginning. Court dates, testimony, witness protection, housing assistance, counseling services. The system that had failed to protect them before would need to prove itself worthy of their trust. Mrs. Chen returned with a folder thick with paperwork and possibilities. I've been making calls, she announced quietly. There's an emergency housing program specifically for families fleeing domestic violence. It's not temporary shelter. It's transitional housing with support services, job training, childcare assistance. Sarah's eyes filled with tears that had nothing to do with physical pain. How long have you been trying to get us help? Officer Ramirez asked, studying the social worker's determined expression. 3 months, Mrs. Chen admitted, ever since the first police report was filed and then mysteriously withdrawn. I've been tracking this case, waiting for the right moment when we could intervene effectively. Officer Ramirez felt pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. You knew about the previous attacks. We suspected, but couldn't prove anything. Sarah was too frightened to testify. The witnesses disappeared, and the evidence was always insufficient. But tonight changed everything. Emma's courage in seeking help gave us the breakthrough we needed. Emma looked up from her mother's embrace, her young voice carrying weight beyond her years. Are you going to make sure the bad men stay away forever? Mrs. Chen knelt beside the hospital bed, meeting Emma at eye level. We're going to do everything in our power to keep you and your mama safe, but I need you both to be brave enough to trust us and work with us. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. I tried to handle it alone. I thought if I just paid them what they claimed I owed, they'd leave us alone. But the amount kept growing, and their visits kept getting worse. Officer Ramirez had seen this pattern countless times. Predators who disguised extortion as legitimate debt collection, targeting vulnerable single mothers who had few resources and fewer options. The system was designed to isolate victims, making them feel like they had nowhere to turn. "What exactly did they claim you owed them?" Officer Ramirez asked, pulling out her notepad. Sarah's face flushed with shame. "My ex-boyfriend, Emma's father, apparently borrowed money from them before he disappeared 2 years ago. They said the debt transferred to me when he vanished. Started at $500, but with their interest rates and penalty fees, they claimed it was over $15,000. That's not how debt works," Mrs. Chen explained firmly. "What they were doing was criminal extortion, pure and simple. No legitimate debt collector breaks into homes and assaults people." Emma's small voice interrupted their conversation. "Mama, you mean Daddy's friends were the ones hurting us?" Sarah struggled to find words that would explain adult cruelty to a 6-year-old mind. "They weren't Daddy's friends, baby. They were bad men who told lies about money to try to scare us." Officer Ramirez made additional notes while listening to this exchange. The case was becoming more complex by the hour, but also more winnable. Financial records, witness testimony, pattern of escalating violence, child endangerment charges. The prosecutors would have multiple angles to ensure these men faced serious consequences. Dr. Patterson returned with discharge paperwork and medical instructions. Sarah's injuries required follow-up care, but she was stable enough to leave the hospital if appropriate housing could be arranged. "The emergency housing program has an opening," Mrs. Chen announced. "It's a 2-bedroom apartment in a secure building across town. 24-hour security, on-site counseling services, and most importantly, complete confidentiality. Your location won't appear in any public records." Emma perked up at mention of their own apartment. "Will I have my own room?" "You'll have your own room, your own bed, and your mama will be right next door," Mrs. Chen assured her. "Plus there's a playground and other kids to play with." For the first time since Officer Ramirez had met her, Emma smiled. A real smile that reached her eyes and transformed her entire face. The resilience of childhood was remarkable, but it needed protection and nurturing to flourish. Officer Ramirez helped gather Emma's few belongings while Sarah was assisted into a wheelchair for transport. The little girl had arrived at the hospital with nothing but her torn teddy bear and soaked pajamas. She was leaving with donated clothes from the hospital's emergency supply and something infinitely more valuable: hope. The drive to the emergency housing facility took them through parts of the city Officer Ramirez knew with good schools well from her patrol routes, safe neighborhoods, adequate public transportation, and community resources. Places where Emma could be a normal 6-year-old instead of her mother's protector. Sarah dozed fitfully during the ride, exhaustion and pain medication finally claiming their due. Emma sat quietly in the back seat, clutching her teddy bear while watching the city pass by through rain-streaked windows. "Officer Ramirez?" Emma said suddenly. "Will you visit us in our new home?" The question caught Officer Ramirez off guard. Department policy discouraged ongoing personal relationships with victims and witnesses, but something about Emma's situation transcended standard procedures. "I'll check on you both," Officer Ramirez promised. "And if you ever need help again, you have my card with my direct number." Emma studied the business card Mrs. Chen had given her, running small fingers over the raised letters. "I can't read all the words yet, but I remember your name." The emergency housing facility resembled a small apartment complex more than any institutional shelter. Individual units with private entrances, landscaped grounds, and security features that were present but not oppressive. Mrs. Chen had been right about the playground. Emma spotted it immediately through the car window. Their new apartment was furnished with basic necessities, but felt like a palace compared to the chaos they'd left behind. 2 bedrooms, a full kitchen, living area with a television, and most importantly, locks that actually worked and security systems that responded to legitimate authorities. Emma explored her new room with wonder, opening closet doors and testing light switches. The donated clothes from various charity organizations filled the dresser drawers and provided options she'd never had before. Everything was clean, safe, and theirs. Sarah settled onto the living room couch with obvious relief, her broken ribs making every movement careful and deliberate. "This feels like a dream," she told Officer Ramirez. "I keep expecting to wake up back in that house with them pounding on the door." "You're awake and you're safe," Officer Ramirez assured her. "But staying safe is going to require work from all of us. Court appearances, testimony, following security protocols." Mrs. Chen spread paperwork across the coffee table, explaining services and requirements, counseling sessions for both Sarah and Emma, job placement assistance, legal aid coordination, and regular check-ins with social services. The support system was comprehensive, but it required active participation. Emma returned from exploring her room with a question that revealed her practical nature. "When do I start school here?" "Monday morning," Mrs. Chen replied. "I've already enrolled you at the elementary school 6 blocks away. They have an excellent program for children who've experienced trauma." Officer Ramirez watched Emma process this information with the serious expression of someone much older. Starting a new school was challenging under normal circumstances. Starting after escaping violence added layers of complexity that required careful handling. "Will the bad men know where my school is?" Emma asked. "No, sweetheart. Your school records are confidential, and the staff has been briefed on your situation. Plus, there will be additional security measures in place." Emma nodded solemnly, accepting these assurances with the trust that children place in adults who have proven themselves reliable. Her faith in Officer Ramirez and Mrs. Chen was complete, built on actions rather than empty promises. Officer Ramirez prepared to leave as evening approached, knowing that her official involvement in the case was transitioning to other departments and agencies. But her personal investment in Emma and Sarah's welfare would continue indefinitely. Sarah struggled to stand as Officer Ramirez gathered her things. "I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done. Emma was right to run to you for help. Emma was brave beyond her years," Officer Ramirez replied. "But she learned that courage from watching you survive impossible circumstances and still put her safety first." The goodbye was emotional, but not final. Officer Ramirez would return for follow-up visits, court preparation sessions, and simple check-ins to ensure the transition was proceeding smoothly. Emma hugged her tightly, whispering promises to be good and study hard in her new school. As Officer Ramirez drove away from the emergency housing facility, she reflected on the events that had brought them all together. A little girl's desperate cry for help during a storm had set in motion a chain of events that dismantled a criminal enterprise and provided safety for its victims. Her radio crackled with routine calls and mundane reports. But Officer Ramirez's mind remained focused on Emma and Sarah. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, court dates, and the slow work of rebuilding lives shattered by violence. But tonight, a 6-year-old girl would sleep safely in her own bed, knowing that heroes sometimes answered when brave children asked for help. The rain had stopped by the time Officer Ramirez returned to the station, but the memory of Emma's voice calling through the storm would stay with her forever. Sometimes the most important calls came from the smallest voices, and sometimes saving one family meant changing an entire community's understanding of what protection really meant. The weeks that followed transformed both Officer Ramirez and the entire police department's approach to domestic violence cases. Emma's courage had exposed a criminal network that extended far beyond 3 men collecting fabricated debts. Detective Mills, who had arrived as backup that stormy night, discovered connections to similar operations across 4 neighboring counties. The investigation revealed a sophisticated extortion scheme targeting single mothers, elderly residents, and immigrant families. The perpetrators researched their victims carefully, exploiting vulnerabilities and isolating them from support systems. Sarah's case became the cornerstone that brought down an organization responsible for terrorizing dozens of families. Officer Ramirez found herself testifying before City Council about gaps in victim protection services. Her voice carried new authority as she described Emma's midnight run through the storm, the courage it took for a 6-year-old to approach strangers for help, and the systemic failures that had forced a child into that impossible position. Emma adapted to her new school with remarkable resilience, though shadows of that night occasionally surfaced. Her teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, reported that Emma had become fiercely protective of classmates who seemed sad or scared. During recess, she would approach children sitting alone and ask if they needed help finding someone to talk to. Sarah's recovery progressed steadily, both physically and emotionally. The counseling sessions Mrs. Chen had arranged proved invaluable in processing years of accumulated trauma. But more importantly, Sarah began to understand that accepting help wasn't weakness, it was wisdom. The emergency housing program exceeded everyone's expectations. Sarah enrolled in a medical assistant training program, while Emma thrived in her new environment. The secure building became home to 3 other families escaping similar situations, creating an informal support network of mothers who understood each other's struggles without judgment. Officer Ramirez visited every Tuesday evening, ostensibly for case follow-up, but increasingly for personal connection. Emma would greet her at the door with artwork from school, stories about new friends, and questions about police work that revealed a sharp intelligence and unwavering sense of justice. One Tuesday, Emma presented Officer Ramirez with a carefully written letter. The handwriting was still developing, letters occasionally backward, but the message was clear. "Thank you for saving my mama and me. When I grow up, I want to help scared kids like you helped me." The trial proceedings began 3 months after that stormy night. Sarah's testimony was powerful, delivered with quiet strength that impressed the packed courtroom. She described months of escalating threats, the impossible choice between her daughter's safety and financial survival, and the terror of that final night when violence erupted beyond her ability to manage alone. Emma didn't testify directly, but her impact permeated every aspect of the case. The prosecutors presented her torn teddy bear as evidence, explaining how a 6-year-old had carried this silent witness through a storm to find help for her mother. The jury's reaction was immediate and visceral. Detective Mills testified about the broader investigation Emma's courage had triggered. 47 victims came forward after the initial arrests, describing similar patterns of escalation and intimidation. The 3 men who had attacked Sarah faced charges in multiple jurisdictions, with sentences that would keep them incarcerated for decades. The defense attorneys attempted to minimize their clients' actions, claiming they were merely collecting legitimate debts through aggressive but legal means. This strategy backfired spectacularly when prosecutors presented evidence of manufactured documentation, falsified interest calculations, and recorded threats against children. Officer Ramirez watched the verdicts from the gallery. Sitting beside Sarah and Mrs. Chen, Emma was in school, spared from witnessing the legal conclusion to her nightmare, but knowing that the bad men would never hurt her family again, guilty on all counts: conspiracy, extortion, assault, child endangerment, and racketeering. The judge's sentencing remarks acknowledged Emma's role without naming her directly. The courage of one small voice calling for help in the darkness has illuminated crimes that might have continued indefinitely. 2 years later, Officer Ramirez received a handwritten invitation to Emma's 8th birthday party. The little girl who had once run through a storm clutching a torn teddy bear now stood confident and smiling, surrounded by friends who knew nothing of her darkest night. Sometimes the smallest voices carry the greatest power to change everything. Emma's courage didn't just save her mother that stormy evening. It dismantled a criminal network and proved that heroes come in all sizes, even 6-year-old ones who refuse to let darkness win.